Goku Blue is one of, if not the best anchor in the game, thanks to his normals. He has 3 lows and an overhead built in, not to mention above average range and high solo damage with options to boot. He's lacking a little bit in the projectile department because he has no command projectiles and not much in the air. His ground and ki blasts are really good though. Even though he scored average here, it's really below average, but giving him only 1 bar it seems a little too low. I might have to expand the gauges to 5 notches if this keeps happening. Anyway, Goku's mobility is definitely above average, seeing as you have natural teleports and a fast dive kick. He's an honest character, seeing as his forced offense, such as his dive kick and teleports, are punishable if your opponent's watching out for them. However, that requires your opponent to be honest as well. While being extremely strong at what he does, Goku Blue lacks unreactable mix-ups and an error-proof forced offense, thus keeping him from 4 bars in the meta section. It's not a terrible idea to have him as point or secondary, but because his normals are so good, he's best as an anchor. Quarter circle forward and attack gives you a charge and elbow that plows through small ki blasts. The light version has the fastest startup, but short travel distance. The medium version takes a little longer initially, but travels a bit further and counts as a smash. If you're close to the corner, it'll wall bounce, allowing you to combo meterlessly. The heavy version teleports to the opposite side of the screen and travels to your opponent's location when activated, meaning that if your opponent is advancing forward, you're probably gonna whiff. It gives you a meaningless wall bounce in open space and a not so meaningless wall bounce in the corner. Like all rear entry specials, there's a lot of damage scaling. This charge and elbow attack can be done in the air and operates exactly how you'd expect. During your active frames, you reflect smaller projectiles, just like your super dash. And that doesn't mean much since your travel distance is limited, but your heavy version reflects during the startup frames as well. And no, you can't use a heavy version to cancel out of your block stun like you can with reflect and super dash. But you can use reflect first, then immediately go into it for an alternative to your super dash, just in case your opponent's trying to bait you. In general, you're only going to use this special for combo purposes, but you can get some mileage out of the heavy version, and of course we're going to talk about that later on. Quarter circle back and attack gives you a command grab. The light version gives no wall bounce and you must use meter or an assist to combo. Medium gives you a small wall bounce and allows you to combo meterlessly in the corner. And heavy gives you a bigger wall bounce, but you still need the corner to combo meterlessly. With the light and heavy versions, you still attack on whiff, which will give you a short knockback. And yes, it's actually a teleport, but due to the long startup and short travel distance, it's not much to work with. Oh, and it has the same damage scaling as rear entry specials, and that's not good, so aside from very specific situations, just use a Dragon Rush instead. Quarter circle back and attack while airborne gives you a fast dive kick that takes your opponent to the ground. You can combo into the light version normally, and your opponent can ground tech. The medium dive kick has the longest startup, making it tough to combo, however it gives you a slide knockdown. The heavy version has the quickest startup and grants a slide knockdown as well. If used sparingly, you can use the dive kick to get in on your opponent, but its main usage is end and high juggles to position your opponent for a combo extension with the vanishing attack. Quarter circle forward or back and the special button gives you the instant transmission. You appear directly in front or behind your opponent with a smash attack that gives a meterless combo in the corner. And it's plus on block too. But it's not that plus on block, so anything aside from a stand and light and you could get interrupted. Unfortunately, you're considered airborne, therefore crouch and heavy will shut down your natural mix-up. On a side note, if done in the air, you're going to descend very slowly before you teleport. So if you land before teleporting, your attack is cancelled. It's not a big deal, but it's something you should know. Here's an overview of what attacks should be on your mind in a general matchup. Alright, I always dread talking about attacks like Goku's instant transmission because there's a deep-rooted logic behind it, and I never feel like I explained it properly. But here it goes. It's one of those polarizing attacks that you either think is the greatest or you think it's garbage because you always get punished. The reason being because if your opponent doesn't have the proper respect for it, as in they're not altering their default approach to compensate for an ambiguous track and teleport that you can combo after and is plus on block. You're gonna murder them. On the other hand, if your opponent does respect your instant transmission, they're not gonna overcommit on anything in the neutral because they're secretly waiting to punish you with the crouch and heavy. And when that happens, most people will say instant transmission is garbage because they always get punished and blah 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 blah. It's not something you can react to unless you're looking for it. And when you're looking for it, you're playing defensively in the neutral. So the fear of instant transmission is making it easier to get in on your opponent. If you're the type that's looking to send a message though, you can use a heavy elbow charge to punish those people that are waiting for your instant transmission. You're not considered airborne, so therefore crouch and heavy isn't going to plow right through you. Next up we have your general purpose ki blast. While it's not enough to center a strategy around, it's never a bad idea to toss out a few random ki blasts to keep your opponent on their toes. Alright, now we have the universal options. A low air dash in heavy and a grounded quick dash in crouch and medium. As an anchor, I would always side with the low air dash because of the additional options you have from a jump in attack. However, if I have teammates, it's either or. Because it's the neutral and no one has frame advantage or disadvantage, I usually don't like using lights up close. I instead would just use a medium attack a few frames earlier than normal. However, in Goku Blue's case, I'm a big fan of lights, crouch and light to be more specific. At close range with the crouch and light, you can go into a stand and light, which naturally leads to an overhead, or you can opt for a slightly delayed crouch and medium. It is true you can be interrupted before the overhead in your light auto combo, but light, crouch and medium can't be, even if you considerably delay it. Delay in crouch and medium is extremely important because if you don't delay, not only will your attack rhythm be different, you can't punish opponents for trying to interrupt you since it's going to jail them. You can also opt to go into the Chi-Chi fingers after the impact of a crouch and light if you're close enough. But if you have some assist, it's usually better not to risk your advantage with a low damage command grab and just go into your block string instead. Right off the bat, let me say that this section isn't very important to Goku Blue due to the proposed strategy I put forth. So why is this section here then? Well, while I generally only talk about stuff that pertains to my proposed default strategy, I am aware that some people might find this helpful to their specific strategy. And most importantly, it'll just look weird and lazy if I skip it. Oh, and also, I'm just gonna let the HUD show you the timing for the assist call. Let me know if you guys want me to go back to the older format. But I must say, it got kinda weird last video with me repeatedly saying, just after the heavy, in slightly different ways. So we'll see how this does. Okay, a point was assigned if you can combo after the assist, an additional point if you can combo with the stand and medium, and a third point if the time is reasonable. A point can be taken away if the extension is extremely difficult or impractical. Starting on the left side, we have the compatibility with raw vanishing attacks. Now to heavy elbow, which can be useful if someone's trying to punish an instant transmission or your vanishing attack. Now to the other teleport special, the instant transmission. It's important to remember that if you get hit before your assist releases their attack, they're just gonna stop and jump out, so assists aren't gonna make an instant transmission any safer. Moving on to the Chi-Chi fingers. I probably shouldn't call it that, but I do. Because it takes a while to activate and has a short range, you have to condition your opponent to get any usage from it, much like real life. Now on to the low juggle extensions. Lastly, we have the corner dragon rush extensions. The juggle I use mostly is light, medium, down, heavy, double jump, light, light, cancelled into a light dive kick. But if I use something else, it'll be obvious. In closing, don't worry if your team doesn't synergize well with Goku Blue. He's really good by himself, and the setups that I have later on in the video, you can use practically any assist with it. So yeah, it's more important that his assist synergizes well with your other teammates. Sure, Goku Blue is best as an anchor because he doesn't need assist for extensions and possesses perhaps the best spark rushdown in the game. But sometimes it's going to be in the match early. Maybe to allow your teammates to regen blue health? Maybe you got forced in, or perhaps you just don't use them as your primary anchor. Either way, it's good to know how to take advantage of assist. So let's take a look at a mid-combo reset. Go into any assist-based low juggle, however instead of land in after the heavy to continue when the assist impacts, immediately throw out an air ki blast to force a ground tech, then cancel out of the ki blast to your instant transmission. Your opponent won't be expecting the juggle to end like that, and with everything going on, chances are they're not going to notice your startup animation. If they tech forward or back, they're going to land right before the impact and get crossed up. If they teched upward or chicken blocked, you'll catch them in the air, and with your advantage, you're going to force them to the ground for free and put them in a block string. There's two problems with this, however. If your opponent techs backwards and crouches, your instant transmission is going to whiff. This is unlikely against competent opponents because there's no reason to hold down back when you're being juggled, but it can happen. Furthermore, they can use a crouch and heavy to plow through your instant transmission. But if that's unacceptable to you, instead of using instant transmission, substitute that with the heavy elbow as soon as you land. It'll cross up an upward tech if timed correctly, as well as forward and back techs. The only drawback is if your opponent techs back or forward then chicken blocks, you're going to go right underneath them. In this unlikely situation, use the medium elbow instead. It'll impact during the first few frames of their jump, giving you the hit. The drawback is that if they tech upwards, you're going to come up short. Keep in mind that most people who like to chicken block will tech upwards, so it's not something that should happen at all, but if it does, you know how to punish it. Oh yeah, if the cross-up protection is kicking in when your opponent techs upward, you need to delay your jumping heavy or whatever to get your opponent lower to the ground. This works with practically any assist as demonstrated by Trunks in 21, and it's the best way to sneak in those rear entry specials for mental damage. And of course, what kind of video would this be without an oppressive block string, eh? The tilde, that squiggly thing, in the notation means to slightly delay the input. Not enough for your opponent to get out, but just enough to let your assist begin recharging. If your opponent's the type to mash reflect early in the block string, randomize the order of your mediums to punish. The natural gap in this block string is after the crouch and heavy, but the gap is so small that they'll get hit if they try to attack or even jump out. The only thing they can do is reflect or use an invulnerable attack. Of course, you can use instant transmission to punish the reflect, seeing as it's also plus on block, but it can be risky if your opponent has a good relationship with crouch and heavy. Personally, I like to use the light elbow to switch the gap to the assist, and it's really no big deal if your assist gets reflected. Seeing as the light elbow is gapless, why not just use that with alternate assist timing? Well, I tried that, but I can't keep it going for more than a few loops due to the strict timing. But just because I can't doesn't mean you can't, especially if you use multi-hidden assist. Oh, and this block string can be done with practically any assist, as long as they're not in the Krillin family or named Gohan. While most people only use Sparking for blue health regeneration, there are significant offensive advantages too, mainly the ability to jump cancel out of block normals. This is extremely important because it turns every low normal used in a block string into a mix-up. Lows are also used to punish people who are trying to reflect since the input itself requires for them to stand. Just make sure not to leave a gap in your block string or else you're going to get reflected. Goku Blue has 3 lows that translates into 4 mix-up spots in a single block string. And here's a chart showing them. Each starting color represents a block string variation, and all variations lead to an ender that gives you enough advantage to do it all over again. As you can see, there are 2 different brackets to end with. So let's look at the top bracket first. These are your jump cancels. The upper ender is your low air dash into a medium kick. It's possible to be interrupted if your opponent's mashing, but the plus side is that it will cross up your opponent, making it pretty difficult to block. Lower ender is your forward medium universal overhead cancelled into an air dash in medium. Forward medium is easier for your opponent to recognize and doesn't cross up, thus it's easier to block. It can also be interrupted if your opponent's mindlessly mashing. However, the benefit to this is that a crouch and heavy loses to it, and most good players will punish an airborne attack with the crouch and heavy. Okay, on to the second bracket. You'll notice that this is based off of a crouch and heavy, which does in fact make you airborne. The top ender is very similar to the previous bracket, so it'll cross up, and yes, it's still very interruptible. However, this time around, if your opponent tries to reflect, they're gonna get a forward special instead because you'll be behind them when they get out of the block stun. Unfortunately, since you must attack immediately upon switching sides to prevent getting interrupted, you can't use normals to hit confirm and expect to continue to combo. Therefore, you gotta cancel into your medium elbow, then use a vanishing attack. Canceling into instant transmission will also punish reflex, and you don't have to use meter to keep the advantage on block with the stand-in light afterwards. But if your opponent is looking for it, it's very reactable. The bottom ender will shut down every option except for reflect and invulnerable attacks. The gap before your medium elbow is so small that they're going to get hit if they try to jump out or even crouch and heavy you. Cancel into your vanishing attack immediately to keep the offense going. So, this bottom bracket is a 50-50 for aggressive opponents. If you think they're going to try to mash on an attack, use the bottom ender. If you think they're going to reflect, use the top ender. Man, this chart makes it seem a lot more complicated than it really is, and most of the time you're just going to do a variation to the top bracket anyway. But for those people that are disrespectful and try to attack you during your spark rushdown, you give them that bottom bracket. You teach them a lesson. Alright, so it's pretty obvious that one of the DLC guys is going to be next. Question is, which one? As of right now, I'm leaning towards Vegito, but that's just because I think most people would want to see him. So I've been doing a lot of thinking, and while I have been advised to create a Patreon in the past, what ultimately kept me from making one is that it's hard for me to imagine people supporting my videos enough to the point where I can make it my full-time job, and not just something on the side when I'm not too tired. But after doing some research and a lot of consideration, I think I'm actually going to go through with it. So when the next video is out, I'm probably going to have a Patreon link for those who want to support the channel. And of course, those of you who do support the channel will have a lot of influence on the videos I make.